Welcome, you're watching Kaleidoscope Life News Capsule.
Sri Lanka is recovering from an economic crisis and investors are cautious, aren't they? Our history of seemingly random policy changes doesn't do us any favors either, and there seems to be no broad confidence in Sri Lanka's investment ecosystem. Kithmina Hewage, Senior Development Policy Advisor and member of the World Economic Forum's Expert Network, who works across 17 Asian economies, joins me from Hong Kong for some analyses. Kithmina, welcome. What are the drawbacks and what are the strengths for an investor looking at Sri Lanka?
In terms of the strengths, it's pretty clear. One is obviously our labor force, which is quite highly educated, and also the location of the country in terms of how close it is to India and the Indian subcontinent, and also the location in terms of the broad Asian region, as well as the connection to the Middle East and the West. So these are all factors that should ideally on paper lead to better investor confidence in the country. Unfortunately, the weaknesses are mostly policy and regulation related, which then is, of course, based on our politics. In Sri Lanka, over the past few years, we've had a lot of bad regulations and policies, which has made trading and investing in Sri Lanka burdensome. And as a result, the big investors in the world, and in particular in Asia, where I work, who I work with, are not particularly too confident in coming to Sri Lanka.
So where does Sri Lanka need to pull up her socks?
One is on the broader investment and business ecosystem. So right now, our economic policies over the years, regardless of party, have been somewhat protectionist. And we have imposed high tariffs and also made it very difficult for foreign investors to come. These are the types of decisions and choices that investors make. One is how easy is it to come in and also operate. The second is in terms of the cost involved. Now, a lot of people say that, it's the labor costs that are disincentivizing foreign investors. And that is not true in Sri Lanka. It's not. It's actually the trade cost. Because we impose so many tariffs and other taxes on the goods that come in, as a result, the cost of producing a good in Sri Lanka is more expensive as well. So we are not necessarily uncompetitive on labor costs. Where we are actually uncompetitive is on the raw material, the cost of raw materials that are used for manufacturing and other investments. We live in a world where there are global supply chains, and we need to be able to import quickly, add value to that product, and then export to a different market. And that is where countries like Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, and so on have succeeded. And that is what our policies haven't helped.
What are the interesting hotspots in this region for investors?
One is, I think, the South Indian market in particular has been very interesting for Asian investors as well as global investors, because South India is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, particularly in terms of manufacturing. So Sri Lanka has a perfect opportunity to become a logistics hub for this region, for the South Indian subcontinent and South India in particular, as well as a manufacturing base as well. So moreover, there is a lot of trading opportunities in the ASEAN region and China too. So manufacturing in particular is somewhere that Sri Lanka can plug into if we have the right economic policies and trade policies, but also in terms of logistics. And this requires a much more liberal and progressive thinking about how we can position ourselves as a logistics hub, especially as South India is growing, especially as the rest of the Asia and ASEAN in particular is growing at one of the fastest rates in the world. We can position ourselves as a maritime and as well as an air freight logistics hub. Now, this requires some policy changes in terms of how we allow goods to come into the country, how it's allowed to kind of our customs processes. We need to make it much more efficient. We need to digitize these processes. And also then we need to encourage foreign as well as local private investors to be involved and more active in this space.
From an investor's perspective, what are the sectors and industries that hold promise?
Logistics is one of the big things that keeps coming up for Sri Lanka when we speak to investors around the world. In addition, in terms of manufacturing, the electronics industry sector is an area where Sri Lanka can plug in. So, for example, the iPhone or any phone for that matter is all of it is not produced in one country. Parts and components of an electronic item are produced in different countries and then assembled in China or somewhere else in the world. So Sri Lanka can easily tap into those parts and components supply chain. Another, of course, is tourism. We also have, I think, a lot of potential for education, tourism, education services provision, if we are going to be progressive with that sector. So if we allow private investment to complement our state education sector, then that will also encourage more people, more students from around the region to come to Sri Lanka and study. But that requires that investment beyond the state sector. So state education and free education should be protected at all costs. But at the same time, we should also allow private education investment so that then encourages and creates more opportunities for employment, but also economic growth and education opportunities for Sri Lankans as well.
Looking at South Asian and our Southeast Asian neighbours who have done well, what are the lessons that we can take in actually attracting FDIs?
So if you look at countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, these are all examples of small economies like Sri Lanka that have done really well. So I think what we need to understand for Sri Lanka is that we are a population of 22 million, which means that foreign investors aren't necessarily interested in the Sri Lankan domestic market. That's what differentiates a small economy like Sri Lanka from a large economy, like a large domestic economy like India or China. So what economies like us have done is to plug into the supply chains. And the first and most important thing is policy consistency and investment security. So we need to have, regardless of political party, at least some recognition and responsibility and understanding that there are some constants that need to be adhered to and respected. So that could mean the respect for fiscal responsibility, right? So making sure that we don't increase our debt levels exponentially within like 6 months' time because of a tax break that no one asked for. Changing our trade policies and suddenly going kind of imposing quotas and high tariffs overnight. And kind of nationalizing private investment and in an ad hoc way, due just purely because of political reasons or personal reasons. These are all signals that foreign investors see, and they follow the news as much as everyone else does. And they see that if Sri Lanka's politics and political regimes are not consistent and can vary from one end to the other very regularly, then investors will go to other countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, etc. So what we can learn from them is firstly is the policy consistency and the responsibility for some key macroeconomic metrics. And the second is progressive trade policies. And to understand that we need to be an outward-looking economy, an export-led economy. And for that, we need to ensure that our trade policies are in place, our investment policies are in place, and also at the same time, make sure that things like education policies that are ready to work in a private sector company where they are required to problem solve regularly, rather than simply memorize things from a textbook and replicate that in an exam. So all these things, and we need to build up that ecosystem. And these are policies and these are practices that have succeeded in countries that we are competing against.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Remember to subscribe, follow, and like us for more.
You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Sri Lanka Life.